Let me sort of dot point what we mean by the word fundamentals in regards to property markets, and make it as specific as we can to Hobart. So Hobart's got, more people with home ownership, or Tasmania's got more people with home ownership than any other state in Australia.
Going once, going twice, sold. You're listening to the Property Pod.
Right, guys, welcome back to the Property Pod, your weekly engagement into real estate here in the Hobart marketplace. I'm your host, Aaron Horn, and unfortunately, it doesn't give me any pleasure to reveal that Patrick and John are not in their spots at the moment of recording. I have a confession to make. I might have blown it a little bit. With the excitement of having our guest on today, I might not have done a backup, and it's kind of thrown things through the loop. So firstly, I've got to apologise to our listeners for a lack in audio quality for the majority of this show. We had our guest Simon Pressley on. He's an absolute cracker to listen to. And yes, in all the excitement, I didn't record a backup, which would have fixed a lot of the problems that I've had to deal with today in the edit suite. That being said, everything he's got to say is very, very valuable. It's a really good list. I'm not going to waste a lot of your time here at the start of this show. I'm just going to say that we've got a cracking episode. You might see me and Pat wearing our footy colours. We were having a little joke with the man from his last visit on the show. He wore his Brisbane Lion colours, which were definitely warranted, whereas our teams, the Bombers and the Eagles, are sitting firmly at the bottom of the ladder. So we didn't really have much to crow about, but we had a little yarn with him about that at the start with. But in terms of the podcast, the guy is a wealth of knowledge, an absolute expert and a superstar. So we do appreciate him coming on and chatting with us. And again, many apologies for the audio problems. Hopefully I've tried to clean it up as much as I can. All the content is definitely worth listening to though. So jump on board the Property Pod this week, and we will be back next week with even more Property Pod. Thank you. That's right, crew. We are back at the desk of the Property Pod, and we have our favourite guest of all time, the guy who keeps reaching out to us and saying, hey, boys, I can get you out of the trouble that you're about to talk yourself into. It is Simon Pressley, the founder and managing director of Propertyology and Hall of Fame inductee of the REIA.
Oh, look at this.
If he reaches out to us to say, hey, I've got some stuff to talk about, we better make sure we introduce the guy.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So welcome to the show, Simon Pressley. Great to have you back, my friend.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for having me back.
It's always a pleasure, and thank you once again for reaching out. I was actually excited. So you sent out a text message to me on Saturday just before my team's open homes. It was just putting some context into what's happening with the mainstream media at the moment versus reality, and I thought it was perfect timing to not only get you on to talk about it, but just to re-inject some, confidence in the staff as well around sales in the Tasmanian marketplace and Australia as a whole.
Yeah, I guess I'll call it people being spooked, Patrick, and it takes me back. I mean, so much has happened in the world in the last 2.5 years, but what's actually happening in the last couple of months in Australian real estate actually takes me back to the very start of the COVID period. Back then it was different things that spooked people, and quite frankly, it was totally understandable that it spooked people. None of us have been through a global health pandemic before, but what's being spooked now has been with us in the history of humankind, interest rates, and the spooking. I actually put it down to digital media. Believe it or not, there's a lot of good things from digital media, but the cons of digital media is bad news that's not justified can just spread so quickly, and it affects human psyche, and that's what's happening now.
And I think I've noticed as well that the headlines that they use is clickbait headlines as well. So you read the headline, and for some people they'll click and actually read the whole article, and maybe the article's not as bad as what the headline implies. However, the majority of people just read the headline and that's the end of what they read, and they scroll on, and then that mentality just gets pushed down the line to everyone else.
Yeah. And because I guess everyone's got not just one device these days, they've got multiple devices. So when they feel like they're reading the same message over and over again, it becomes adopted as truth and gospel without actually pausing to go, well, is that right? It's just the common denominator. Unfortunately, I think the digital world has made us has suppressed intelligence. We're getting more information, but it's poor quality intelligence. And if we just go back to, I mentioned, this reminds me of COVID. The first thing we heard from a real real estate perspective was property prices will tank. They will drop by 20 to 30% because the international borders being closed, and you can't physically have price growth in real estate without population growth. Now, that statement's always been false. But most people don't know that that's false, right? So that was the first thing. So, doom and gloom, right, property prices are going to crash. Then as we come out of that sort of 2 to 3 months national lockdown, the continuation of doomsday reporting continued. First, it was job seeker. When that stops, no one's going to be able to afford their mortgage, and then property values will crash. About 6 months after that, the doomsday topic changed, and it became the loan deferral repayments. Well, soon everyone's going to have to start paying their mortgage again, and they won't be able to afford that, and property prices will crash. Didn't do that. And so over that 2 years, we've actually had the second biggest property boom in Australia's 230-year history, despite those doomsday forecasts. Now we've got interest rates going from effectively zero to, I think they'll end up back somewhere near where they were when the cuts started about 6 months before COVID. And people will go, what was all the fuss about?
Well, I guess that's what we're hoping, obviously, in the property industry, that is the case. But you point out some core fundamentals as to why you think that may be the case that I found quite interesting. I know my team found that as well.
Yeah. So we've got really, really strong fundamentals, and that's a big fancy word that makes people sound intelligent. So a lot to sort of,
start using that more.
It's John's favourite word. Fundamentally, I agree.
But let me sort of dot point what we mean by the word fundamentals in regards to property markets, and make it as specific as we can to Hobart. So Hobart's got, more people with home ownership, or Tasmania's got more people with home ownership than any other state in Australia. About 75% of Tasmanians' population live in their own home and 25% rent. That standard house over the last 10 years has increased in value by about 120%.
That's nuts.
So household wealth is incredible, right? Yeah. Household cash flows. Most people, contrary to the hourly media reports we read, most people have not actually taken on any more debt over the last few years. Most people haven't. They're still in the same home that they were in years ago. Over the years, as interest rates dropped, most people, before they started dropping, were already paying a loan repayment a lot more than what the bank required them to pay. And that's common sense because no one wants to be paying a mortgage off any longer than what we need to. So when the RBA about 3 years ago started cutting interest rates, the actual loan repayment that was coming out of the household budget stayed the same. People sort of said, well, I can still afford to pay what I was paying. If they want to charge me less interest, so be it. So they continue to do that. Often people have got a direct debit set up. So that means as the RBA drops interest rates, they're paying more off the principal rather than interest. So not only is their asset value growing at a really, really sharp pace, the reduction of their debt is accelerating as well. So they've continued to do that over the last 3 years. Fast forward to now, their home is worth more than what they probably ever imagined, and their mortgage is a lot smaller than what it was. Progressively, the RBA will claw back interest rates back to somewhere near where they were 3 years ago, and the household budget for an overwhelming majority of mortgage holders will not feel anything because they're already paying a lot more than what they require. The RBA, about 6 months ago, published a report. They said that the combined sum of everyone in a mortgage in Australia, surplus money in offset accounts and redraw facilities, was well over $100 billion. So not only have we got all this equity in our house, we are flush with cash. Some strong fundamentals there. Our economy, just this month, Tasmania officially broke an all-time record lowest unemployment rate ever. There are more jobs available than people available to fill it. You have the biggest infrastructure pipeline in your city's history. These are not bad things. We are seeing the return of international tourism, international students. This will give a further boost to your economy. You are a world leader for renewable energy. I'm so excited that you will probably have an AFL football team in the coming years. And forgetting that I love sport, that is a seriously huge thing for your economy. Seriously huge. The wonders it will do for confidence, the extra visitor revenue that you'll get from it, the promotion of your great city to more mainland Australians and globally, for that matter, like that's huge. So these are really strong fundamentals. Now, importantly, real estate stock. Got some official numbers here for you. This time 10 years ago, there were 750 properties advertised for rents in Hobart, and that was a balanced rental market. Your vacancy rate this time 10 years ago was 3%, which is bang on balance. 750. Today, there are 130 dwellings advertised for rents. Hobart's population over that 10-year period of time has increased by 25,000 people. Your available rental supply, you're about 20% of what it was 10 years ago that's available to rent. Resale supply, this is your game. The stock on the market that real estate agents have to sell to someone who wants to buy. This time 10 years ago, Hobart had 4,600 dwellings advertised for sale. Today, Hobart has 1,500 dwellings advertised for sale. So what does this mean? Supply of real estate, and real estate is what? It's shelter. It's essential. It doesn't matter whether we're in a global health pandemic or whether we're in a rising interest rate cycle. We always need it. It's not shares on the stock market. It's an essential commodity. You've got an all-time record low number of dwellings for sale and for rent at a time when your economy has never been better and will get better. They are not fundamentals for a downturn. All we've got at the moment is fewer buyers at open homes. You guys are on the ground. I'll be fairly confident that you'll support what I'm about to say. You'll have less people going to your open homes than normal.
That's great.
I would be surprised if you say you've got a heck of a lot more properties for sale than what you had 6 or 12 months ago. You might have a little bit more, but probably not much more. But you've got fewer buyers. Because there's so little properties for sale, you don't need many buyers for there to be pressure. Because those who are wanting to buy don't have many choices still. So that doesn't take much for there to be price growth. And in the 5 months so far this calendar year, Hobart's median house prices increased by 7% in 5 months. So you annualise that and you're still in about 15% per annum category. This is before they started cutting interest rates. So what I think will happen is we'll continue to see buyers spooked because they're not consuming the information I've just shared with you. And you'll see less people at open homes until some point they'll sort of go, what the hell am I worried about? I'm going to get on with my life. And then they'll come out and they'll start to transact in real estate. You'll see more people at open homes and they will be confronted with the same thing they had directly before Christmas. Hey, there's not much to choose from. And instantly there'll be all this pressure again.
So the savvy buyers are the ones that are coming to the open homes at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly, Patrick. The ones who are able to cut through the noise and the crap and just focus on what's the truth here. If they focus on that, they'll sort of go, well, why would I not make a really important decision to upgrade my home or to go from being a tenant to a first home buyer or to invest in my future? If you can afford to do those things now, I'd argue that your income stability and your household equity has never been in a better position to do it. So do it if you can afford to do it. Those who will make the most money, fast forward 3 to 5 years from now, will be the ones who transacted first. So there's probably a small window of opportunity for the composed buyer to get active now because there won't be as many people out and about now as what there otherwise would be.
It's an interesting look at it because obviously that's completely different to what is being reported on the daily, but it makes sense. I think too many people get confused by looking at Melbourne and Sydney where there is big giant waves of sort of interest that go up and down and price fluctuation, but the outer cities and the smaller cities don't see that big trend.
Yeah, and it's always been a problem what you've just said there, Patrick. Sydney and Melbourne, whatever's happening in their property markets is always reported as this is the national theme. So if we go back 2013 to 2017, Sydney and Melbourne were booming. Nowhere else in Australia was booming, but the real estate commentary was Australian real estate is booming. Those two cities were. 2017 to 2019, Sydney and Melbourne were in a significant property market downturn. Hobart was booming and most of the rest of Australia was experiencing mild growth. But because the two big cities were in downturn, it was reported as a national downturn. Right now, Sydney and Melbourne have the most fragile property market fundamentals in all of Australia. Propertyology's consistently said that throughout the last 2 years. So what we're seeing now, price reductions in Sydney and Melbourne is, I guess, that the sugar fix, the interest rate cuts, that's gone now. The rising tides lift all ships. You're now left to markets with your core fundamentals will determine performance. Sydney and Melbourne have got fragile fundamentals, so they're starting to see price declines. So people listening to this need to be mindful. Every time they consume information through the mainstream media about real estate, it is dominated by whatever's happening in Sydney and Melbourne. And often what's happening in the rest of Australia is the opposite to what's happening in Sydney and Melbourne.
Well, I like the follow-up saying to the rising tide lifts all ships. Is that when the tide goes out, you soon find out who's been swimming without their bathers on.
Absolutely. Sydney and Melbourne. Great optics there. So we've just summarised facts. Hobart's fundamentals. Yeah. Sydney and Melbourne officially had negative population over the last 2 years. Melbourne especially had 60,000 decline in their population over that period of time. They've had their number of dwellings for sale. I read you Hobart stats. Their number of dwellings for sale is back at equilibrium. You've got about 20% of what you probably should have. Sydney and Melbourne are back at equilibrium. The rental supply in Melbourne and Sydney is at equilibrium. Their economy is a lot more fragile than places like Hobart and the rest of Australia because it has a greater reliance on global events, international tourism, international students. They depend on that a lot. And that hasn't been there for 2 years. So lots of people have left, lots of businesses have closed. So, and they've got a lot more supply. So when you're reading real estate media, always be mindful that they're sort of reflecting what they believe is occurring in Sydney and Melbourne. And that's certainly the opposite of what you're experiencing. Can I give you a few more stats, gentlemen?
Yeah, hit us with everything.
We love stats.
Over the last 5 decades, like if we think we're going through if you think interest rates sound scary, goodness me, like our ancestors will be looking down on us going, oh my God, money is just about free. It's gone to a little bit more than free and people are scared. So over the last 5 decades, we've had 13 prime ministers. We've had inflation for long periods of time at between 5 and 15% for years, right? We've had interest rates at 17%. We've had 4 recessions over the last 5 decades. We've had a GFC. We've had umpteen wars around the world. We've just come out of a global health pandemic. Here's what Hobart's median house price has done over the last 5 decades. And all that stuff's happened. At the start of 1970, Hobart's median house price was $12,000. Fast forward 10 years, it was $36,000. So it tripled in that decade. At the beginning of 1990, it had increased to $83,000. So it had increased by 2.3 times over that decade. Yeah. The next decade, at the start of the year 2000, Hobart's house was $110,000. The next decade, it had increased to $350,000. And we started this decade at $550,000. And in the 2 years since then, we've added $200,000 to that. So throw whatever you want at it. It doesn't mean that, markets will boom every single year. We know that doesn't happen. But over the course of time, real estate is very resilient. There's never no such thing as a perfect market. There's always something adverse happening. And in the digital world, we tend to focus on that adverse thing. But when we look at the combined sum of all things, it's usually a much more positive picture than a negative picture. And because it's shelter, it performs well.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Just kind of running through that time frame, and it just kind of it's pretty stable. It's just doing what it's doing, and as you say, like shelter is essential. So it's not like it's just going to fall off like Bitcoin and just be a completely different. Like what were those things that were popular before? The monkey pictures that were NFTs or whatever they were.
NFTs, that kind of stuff.
Like in a month's time, people might forget they even exist. But shelter is always going to be shelter. Like.
And I can imagine over this 50 years, we've seen the exact same headlines repeat over and over and over again, saying the exact same things.
We would have done, John, but we wouldn't have seen the headline as much because we didn't have the device in our hand 24/7. We would have actually had to physically pick up the newspaper and read it. And most people didn't read the newspaper, but if they did, once they read it, they put it down. That's it. Newspaper's gone. But now we just keep picking the device up, don't we? And keep reading the same message written by a different person over and over again.
Yeah, so just it degrades into you emotionally far quicker.
Yeah, and then all the comments that follow us with all the negative Nellies out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, like the bad news is kind of the doom and gloom is what everybody reports on because that's what, as you say, the clickbait articles are going to provide. So, it's really, really refreshing hearing the other side of the coin, my friend.
Yeah, especially on those comments, they're emotional responses too because people just go, blah, blah, blah. It's not like that. It's just, you can scroll through 1,000 comments. There might be one really well-leveled, educated opinion. Like, okay, that makes sense. The rest of it's all just like slam. So reading through it ends up becoming more entertainment than factual.
With inflation and interest rates, it's important for people to understand it, don't fear it. Understand why interest rates are going up. It's actually a good thing. None of us like paying more interest, but interest rates go up when the economy is strong. Would we rather a strong economy or would we rather a fragile economy where there's less people in jobs and those who have jobs aren't really certain how long they'll hold it for? So we've got a strong economy. The Reserve Bank were always going to increase interest rates as soon as they felt it was safe for our economy to do so. Why that's the case is because whenever there's the next big moment of adversity, the RBA can go, we're going to provide our community with some confidence without even increasing wages. We're going to put money back in their pocket by reducing the interest rate. So they can go cut. So you can't cut when you're at zero.
Yeah.
2 months ago, we were at zero. So the RBA, their strategy is to let's get interest rates back up to a more normal level. And that's why I said earlier, I think they'll end up somewhere where they were 3 years ago when Australian home loan arrears was only 1%. That was it. So I think they'll end up back there. And we should actually be going, hey, that's a really sensible decision because we've got the best economy that we've had in 50 years right now. And let's ensure that we've got enough ammunition at our country's disposal in the event that something changes years down the track. So we shouldn't fear that. Instilling
a safety net into the protocols to be like, look, if we hit another pandemic or something else happens globally, we've got a safety net where we can move backwards, forwards.
Spot on.
Yeah. If I was to, sit on the fence of someone who's, put themselves in a financial situation where the rising costs of living and interest rates will have a really significant impact. Is it a reality that we will see some people that will be affected adversely and have to make tough decisions like selling their homes because they can no longer support those, the inflationary pressure along with interest rates? I suppose that, and then, in answer to my own question, is that, well, I suppose they didn't really plan enough for any other alternative scenario. Would that be right?
Look, every single year there are always people that fit that description, but it's always seriously way less than 1%. And I mean, as I said earlier, like a high majority of Australians have not taken on any extra debt over the last however many years. They've got all those cash reserves, they've got equity. The smaller percentage of Australians who have, say, upgraded their house or become a first home buyer or something like that, they've had to jump through the most stringent finance hoops that any country in the world requires. So it's a legal requirement for every bank in Australia to assess a borrower's ability to take on new debt by adding 3%. So 12 interest rate rises over and above the rate that they're borrowing. So let's say 2 months ago, loosely speaking, you're applying for a loan and the bank's offered you a 2.5% interest rate. You have to convince that bank that you can afford to pay it back at 5.5%.
And that's a valid point that I don't reckon a lot of people realise, Simon. Like, we speak to brokers quite often and they explain that scenario. I was talking to one of the reps here at Rams last week and he pointed that out. So when I was talking to him about, do you think this is going to cause issues for some homeowners, he was quite confident that he doesn't think it will for that exact reason, that they are a lot stricter these days on lending and you have to provide evidence that you can support that loan at the higher rate. So, yeah, I think that's something to reassure people as well, so they are aware that that's how funding and bank loans work these days, so that you're not going to see that potentially huge collapse that people keep describing. The bubble is about to burst.
It's a naive comment, those who make that comment. As I said, for most people, the minimum required loan repayment will just get back to where it was 3 years ago, and most people with a mortgage are already paying more than that minimum 3 years ago. So they seriously won't even feel it.
Yeah. Well, it's been interesting as always, Simon. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat to us. We always appreciate you reaching out to us.
Yeah, but and can I just say before I go, I really like the foliage that's behind me, but looking behind you, that just looks like paradise. Is that the office?
That's the office. That's how I've got to thank COVID for that, Aaron. We adopted the permanent work from home business model once. When we went into that national lockdown, we just never come out of it. We found ourselves more productive and more relaxed. And so I'm sitting on the back deck having this conversation.
Oh, mate, I love that. Yeah, no, it looks absolutely divine. We're covered in snow down this way. The mountains are white like a big Boston bun. So, look, we appreciate you reaching out. And, you're always welcome on the podcast. It's, super having you just as kind of, in our corner and coming and helping us out and loving our state.
Keep up your great work.
Beautiful. Thank you very much as always, mate. Thanks, mate.
See you again. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Like I said, crew, absolute superstar of property. The guy knows his stuff. Simon Pressley, Managing Director of Propertyology and REIA Hall of Famer. Absolute superstar. If you want to find him, head to propertyology.com.au. You can find him on all his socials. And, those guys are superstars. And he's always so generous with his time. I can see that he lives in absolute paradise. Very jealous about that. Thank you for being on the show once again, my friend. Keep listening and we'll be back next week with even more Property Pod. All right, bye. You have been listening to the Property Pod, recorded and edited by 414 Media House in conjunction with 414 Property Code.
This podcast is general information only, and the thoughts and views expressed is the opinion of our panel, and listeners should always seek then use their own investigation into any topic we discuss to ensure they fully understand their own situation.
It does not constitute and should not be relied on as purchasing, selling, financial or investment advice or recommendations, express or implied, and it should not be used as an invitation to take up any agent or investment services. No investment decision or activity should be undertaken on the basis of this information without first seeking qualified and professional advice.